Okay, so what do I mean? Like this wasted bluff and this segue into when we um, if we bet if we bet huge with nuts, that is extremely efficient. Why? Like there's a Jesus man fold. No, not fold, but go down. Why is that very efficient? Because because every worse hand in villain's range in villain's range that calls us makes we make or make it makes us the maximum we can the maximum we can, right? So again, every time every worse hand that the villain in his villain's range that he calls with makes us the maximum we could have because we have the nuts. Now betting huge with a medium strength hand is totally inefficient. Betting big with a medium strength hand is absolutely inefficient. Why? Because think about it. Think about this sentence. All the bad hands, and that's true here too, will fold anyways. So we're kind of like over, like we don't need to bet that big, and because we're making him tighter, right? And all the good hands, that means all the good distribution of hands, because we're literally saying, hey, call us with trips or something. All the good hands will call. So what happened? We just folded out. We just folded out everything, everything. We beat, which is fine, but sure, it take a lot of betting to do that. You know, we already beat that stuff, and we lost maximum. The opposite of this, we made the maximum that we could have versus his worst hands, but here we actually lose the maximum, the max against hands that beat us. So you can see how reverse the situation is. In when we bet big with a medium strength hand, it is so inefficient because he folds all the bad hands, which he was gonna fold anyways, and even with a smaller bet, he was gonna fold, not knowing that he actually has to call more often. And the amount of times he's gonna call is not gonna be equal to the required amount, so we're gonna not have like exactly half the plus EV of that, like 1 1 2 1, and we had 560. We might have like something like 200 chips plus or whatever. You might call like 60% times or whatever, because people generally overfold. So we need to tailor those sizing, but think about it in absolute terms before generalizing. Because when we have the nuts, it's very efficient because every hand in villain's range that calls us is making us the maximum we can, versus some of his worst hands. We're making the max that we can every time he calls us, and then there's a chance he folds us. He folds, which is fine. Now when we bet the same sizing, like big sizing, with a medium strength hand, that's totally inefficient because all the stuff that he had to fold would have just folded anyways, and all the good hands, because we bet so much big, he is forced to call with good hands, uh, um, we get all the folds that we needed anyways, and we beat everything that beats us, we lose the maximum against. Yeah, every hand that beats us, we lose the maximum against, or we lose the max against hands that beat us, versus making the maximum against the worst hands or even like good hands that the villain has. And obviously he's gonna fold trash. He's gonna fold trash here too. And here there's gonna be a certain distribution of hands that are also medium strength that he might hero call and we might be ahead and might be not ahead. So you can understand that this logic of the bet sizing making him have to call twice as more often when we bet pot versus when we bet 50%, because we're betting smaller, he has to call wider, right? That's why multi-way we bet small, because we want, like, we're not even value betting, sort of like we're just trying to clear some people and get some wide ranges to call us. So when we bet high, bet strong and bet big, when we have the nuts, all the worst hands in villain's range, we make the maximum against. And when we do it with a medium strength, mediocre kind of holding, it's so inefficient. And this is completely efficient, and this is so inefficient because the bad hands will fold anyways. All the good hands will call, so we just fold out everything we beat, and we lose the maximum against hands that beat us. So we just reverse the tables on us. So this is a very important statement to understand, that everything that had to fold would have folded anyways. We just folded out things we beat, most of the things that we beat anyways. And this is somewhat called the indifference principle. And everything that beats us, we lost the max against those hands. So we folded out everything we beat, and we lost the max against hands that beat us. And in the other instance, it was winning the max against hands that are the worst to even good hands of the villain. And then there's a certain amount of indifference with his like tendency of calling. And then that's why, like, out of position, we kind of have to be very careful about what kind of combos we block. Now think about bluffing, and in the most extreme sense, and this will be the last part. So now we've covered nuts, we've covered a medium strength hand, and this is very basics and doesn't have to do anything but GTO. It is just math. It's just the basic quantitative math of poker, just logical. These statements that I just made are syllogistic statements. They're not pure logic, but they seem to be reasoned out from a deductive thought process, a forensic sort of thinking, right? Logical thinking. When we're bluffing, now this has many layers to it. When we are bluffing, think about and we bet small, say we bet small, just like we did in that example earlier with the which gains us higher EV. We've established that, and it's a hand that loses to everything, so 3 high, because there's 2 cards, so like the 3 deuce also, right? So this would be a hand that definitely loses versus almost everything that calls, even 3-4 sometimes, or chops, whatever. So this is very efficient. Why is it very efficient? Because every hand after we bet small, and if we get calls, we lost a bit, we were not going to win anything anyways, so we have to decide what sizing. But every hand our opponent folds, think about it, every hand our opponent folds is necessarily going to be better than ours. let's not talk about like having the same hand or whatever. Okay, every hand our opponent folds is going to be a hand that we got to fold that was better than our hand. We were going to lose versus that hand. So again, syllogistically, logically, this makes a lot of sense. When we bluff and bet small with a hand with no showdown, the worst hand is going to lose to every hand that our opponent calls with. Every time our opponent folds versus that hand, we would have made the opponent fold a better hand than ours. Well, that sounds very awesome. And betting small. Now this comes back to the queen 8 hand. With hands that might be beating our opponent's bluffs is again inefficient. Why would we risk these off chance that he might have something, because it's not a pure like 100% time is going to work. Here too we're going to lose some money, but we're going to lose if we check we're going to lose every time. Here we have a certain distribution of hands that are better than ours if we fold, but here if you bet small with hands that might have some kind of showdown, but are somewhat bluffy, but they beat some of our opponent's bluffs. So now you have to think about, that's why you need to this is why the deck is what constrains your strategy and not GTO or exploitative poker. In game, those are tools you use to study. So when we bet with like some kind of hand that already beats some of our opponent's bluffs, it's very inefficient, because a small bet almost calls everything that beats a bluff, right? Do you get that statement? I'll repeat it. Betting small with hands that we lose to, that beat our opponent's bluffs is highly inefficient, because a small bet with a small bet, when we make a small bet, everything that beats a bluff, even like 3x is incentivized like on some kind of board that we had shown earlier, everything that beats a bluff will call. So you see these three statements, where we had one statement where when we bet small, when we have the worst hand, all the hands that the villain folds are going to be better hands than our hand. That's awesome. If we can get some distribution of those hands to call, obviously some will fold. That's true when we have the nuts as well. Even when we bet big, people think we're bluffing, so there will be some hands that they will call with, there will be some hands they'll be folding with, but every hand they do call with will be a hand that's worse than ours. Here, every hand that our villain folds is going to be hands down worse than ours and hands down better than ours, right? But with hands that might be beating some of the bluffs, and I'm not talking about the queen 8 because that's kind of low down the order, even with the ace and a king. Betting small with those hands that beat our opponent's bluffs is highly inefficient, because with a small bet, everything that beats a bluff is a call, or it will be a call, but to a certain degree, right? So now we have a hand that would have beaten some bluffs if we had just checked it, and we would have folded to a bet from in position, if check 2 in position. Now when we bet and he just calls, a lot of the distribution of his hands will just beat us, especially if it's not as bad as queen 8, but it's still like pretty low down the order, and it's definitely in the category of bluffing, but has some high card. So that's really inefficient because we have some showdown, and every time we get called, it would have been, you know, a hand that beats a bluff when we already beat some of the bluffs. So this just does not, again, think about it syllogistically, this logically would just be a poor decision making um, scenario. And so it's very inefficient, and it's very, so, and what was the efficiency? Just like trying to get the juice out of every situation we can, as much out of every situation as we can. And when we bluff with the worst hand, remember, every hand that our opponent folds is going to be a better hand than ours. Doesn't matter if he calls with some and folds with some, because that distribution is alive and working in all situations. And when we have a very good hand, it makes sense to bet big, because every hand that our villain calls us with, hero calls us with, or even if he has a good hand, will be a worse hand than ours, and we will make the maximum out of it. And we already went over betting big with mediocre hands, not bluffs but mediocre hands, and betting big with them. That doesn't make any sense either, because um, again, where did it go? Yeah, because and that's actually the most inefficient thing, because some hands, some of the bad hands already fold when we have that like showdown, and we don't actually have like a total bluff. It's a medium strength hand. Totally inefficient to bet big with it, because so we do under bet and value bet, or like target a range, because the bad hands will fold anyways, and all the good hands will call. So we just fold out what we beat, and we lose maximum against what beats us, which was the opposite of when we had the nuts, where we make the maximum against hands that the villain's range calls, but are obviously going to be worse than ours always. So that was a very simple, and now you scale and think about when you are playing poker, that this was just like a very simplistic model of bluffs and airs and medium strength hands and semi bluffs and like showdown bluffs. But now try to incorporate into like hands that you encounter. So especially when you're out of position, think about what do you block, what do you unblock, uh, especially so on the river with like say 20 big blind like effective stacks you started off with. Like by the time you reach river, even with like one or two bets, it doesn't really matter whether you have blockers or not. Like if you have a flush, if you have trips versus a flush on the board, I mean your stack, the amount that's going to be on in the pot is going to be so much that the blockers don't really matter, because your stack now that's left with you doesn't matter, because what the fuck, man, like half, more than half your stack is going to be in there. But at deep stacks, definitely does matter that you just don't, and that ninth hand, for example, was 200 big blinds. It definitely does matter that you take these situations into uh, your thought, and then think about the more sophisticated situations that you might come across, because eventually you will learn that these very three basic statements, and the example with the smaller bet making us a higher EV in principle, mainly because villains will not ever be reaching the MDFs they need to, let alone clearing it. But you could definitely tell that like betting big was not a good idea, and especially with like hands like nine, just at a nine, then turning it into a bluff and stuff like that. That's the worst. Remember, like betting big with hands that are medium strength or have become medium strength because of the run out is the worst, because it's the polar opposite of the situation where we have the nuts and we make maximum against the villain's range, their calls, and is obviously going to be worse than whatever we have. That's very efficient, but the polar opposite happens when we have a medium strength hand that we try to turn or make a big bet with, because we don't understand relative strength versus like absolute strength. Because all the bad hands will still fold and all the good hands will call. Some we might still beat, but we just folded out what beat us to a majority, to a certain majority, and we lost the max against what beats us. So we just basically played the first example onto ourselves, like the one with where we had the nuts. And betting, when it comes to bluffing, again, betting small with a hand that loses to everything, which is has to be 3 high, can't be too high because that reduces, that might beat something, is efficient because every hand our opponent folds is better than ours. And betting small with hands that beat our opponent's bluffs, some of them at least, is very inefficient because versus a small bet, everything that beats a bluff will call. Now that's logic for you. Now just think of these statements and you'll start to crush, or at least like you'll see a huge difference in your at least river win rate, for example. And you'll appreciate that doesn't matter if you flopped a set, the run out didn't turn out that well. And then you will learn how all of this applies to other sophisticated, and there is sophistication, there are exceptions to the rule, but these basics in Indian games will just win you money. Finally, it will also give you a very good appreciation of how to keep, pot control when you have different classes of hand. And sometimes you might want to be, sometimes I have to check twice with set of aces because I just soak up the board. Sometimes I have to bet check twice, or bet check bet with flush because I have ace queen and it's a king high board, so we block king queen, queen jack, so all the, say, one of the flush cards, so that's bad, versus ace 4, which unblocks the villain from having like king queen of clubs, so top pair with like something backdoor flush or something, or even just the fact that they have a top pair is, those differences from combos you need to figure out. And then sophistication to this baseline statements that I made that are absolutely true will start to win you more. This is Sandman Flying about board, SMF heavy, straight. To your mama's board? Ah? What did I say? Nothing, never mind. That was Patwa. That was a bad word. I don't think YouTube's gonna stop that. Anyways, peace. I might just post this on Facebook then. Speaks two languages. Never mind. It's a joke. Not this though.